There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean Breathes Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads. I've had a fabulous week, reading-wise and otherwise. I don't have much in the way of personal news. In fact, I really don't have any, except this one accidental, intensely felt experience I had thanks to an episode of a podcast that I don't actually subscribe to, so I'm still not sure how it happened. It is the latest episode of the Modern Love podcast, a New York Times podcast that I think that's based on a column that's been running in the New York Times for something like 20 years, which I've never read. I've never listened to the podcast. I don't subscribe to it, but I think they must have tacked it on to the end of another New York Times podcast, probably The Daily. I think that's what that podcast is called, where it's daily news commentary or whatever. Because all the podcasts I've been listening to recently, it's not much of a change from my usual listening tastes, but all of them recently have been about the American presidential election. And so there I was, minding my own business. I had gone to the library to do some reading and take some books and get some other books and blah, blah, blah. And then I was waiting for the bus on the way home. And I finished listening to The Daily. I think that's what happened. And then suddenly I was listening to this interview with an actor who I've never heard of because I don't watch movies or TV or anything. So you guys all know about him. His name's Andrew Garfield. I keep wanting to call him James Garfield because I know a little bit about James Garfield, the U.S. president. Wasn't he assassinated? I'm pretty sure he was. But Andrew Garfield, maybe heard the name. I look at pictures of him. I don't think I've ever seen him before. I know I haven't seen any of the movies he's in. I don't care about Hollywood stuff at all. It's of zero interest to me. But he was really eloquent. And he's got he's half American, half British. He's got quite a pronounced British accent, which was lovely to listen to. And the vibe between him and the host, what's her name? Anna Martin, I guess, was lovely to listen to. And the point of this podcast episode, I'm not going to go on too much longer about this. I'm just going to put a link in the show notes for you to experience it yourself, if you so choose. But the vibe between them, the rapport between them was lovely. There was lots of F-bombs and lots of talk about what matters spiritually in a way that was digestible to me and not cringy. But the point of the episode, I think occasionally on the podcast, they have a celebrity. I think they always have celebrity guests, but sometimes they have the celebrity guest read a previous column from 20 years worth of archives. And Andrew Garfield chose one by a writer I'd never heard of, Chris Huntington. And that essay, all of this will be linked in that one link from the New York Times website. That essay he wrote, Learning to Measure Time in Love and Loss, back in 2013. That's the one that Andrew Garfield chose to read. And something really intense and beautiful happened in the middle of him reading it that I'm going to let you discover for yourself. But I was just so deeply engrossed in what was happening and what was being said. It was just so unexpected. And now I almost feel like I dreamed it because I can't find that episode of the other podcast to verify whether it was tacked on. I think it might have gotten into my brain by osmosis, but it does exist. There is a link in the show notes, and I'm not going to say any more about it, but do have a listen if any of this sounds interesting to you, because that was probably the most intense experience of the week. Without further ado, let's meet this week's mystery guest. And this week's mystery guest is the Australian novelist Kirsty Iltners, joining us from Brisbane in Australia. Am I pronouncing Brisbane right, Kirsty?
Brisbane, yes.
Kirsty, welcome.
Hi, I'm so excited to chat to you.
Viewers who watched the most recent episode of Bite Size Book Chats just a night or two ago, I interviewed Rowan from Tasmania, who is a big fan of your book, and that's what put it on my radar. And he knows you personally or through social media or whatever, so he hooked us up, and here you are as my mystery guest. So your novel, Depth of Field, came out in May of this year. And before we get any further, I want to tell people watching, you can buy it from the Australian publisher as a print book or an ebook. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. but it's recently become available on Kindle as an ebook. So anywhere that you can buy a Kindle book, which I guess is that one company that maybe I shouldn't mention the name of, but it's available through Kindle worldwide. So that's very good. And also, before I ask Kirsty to tell us about Depth of Field, I have to brag on her behalf because I suspect she's probably too modest to do this, but your novel, Kirsty, has the highest rating of any contemporary novel I've ever seen on Goodreads. 4.64-star rating out of 5 stars. So, wow.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that because I was warned by everyone to never ever go on Goodreads. And so I've
Well,
just been listening.
well, I think you might want to make an exception because if you need a ego boost, just check out your reviews because they are fabulous.
Very
About
nice to know.
Yes, it is. Tell us about Depth of Field, Kirsty.
So Depth of Field it follows two different characters. There's Tom, who's a kind of depressed real estate photographer who's stuck in the past after a traumatic event. And then you've got Lottie, who's the other main character. She's a teenage mum who's kind of living above a fish and chip shop with her baby Coral. And she's estranged from her family, and she's just trying to find where she fits in the world, I guess, not being able to fit in with the school friends anymore and too young to fit in with the other parents. So kind of follows both of them.
And I remember that I asked Rowan, I think I can quote my question exactly. I said, Rowan, if it's not a spoiler to say, do these two characters cross paths? And he said, I'm not going to answer.
Yeah, I mean, they may.
That's what he
But
said that too. Yeah, so the reader will have to find out how or if their paths cross at all. What was the germ of the idea for this novel? How did it manifest in your creative mind?
it's kind of difficult to talk about only because I came up with the ending that's how I got the idea, was basically the last kind of bit of like the last sentence really of the book. So I can't talk about that exactly, but it came from reading a news article and just reading all the comments on a news article and just how absolute people were in their opinions without knowing anything about, I mean, most people hadn't even read the article. You don't know any of the external factors. And it was more just about, it just got me thinking about how, I guess, yeah, how people just leap to conclusions and don't really bother to kind of find out anything else or think about anything else that might be going on behind the scenes. And so that's kind of that's how I came up with the idea initially. But yeah, the actual first idea is kind of linked to the end of the book. So
That's all you're going to tell us about that. But I can extrapolate a little bit and tell me if I'm off base that these two characters, if I saw them on the street, it might be really easy for me to make a judgment or an assumption about what kind of people they were that wouldn't necessarily be true.
yeah, well, especially for Lottie, I guess, being a really young mum, that kind of, she just kind of has that judgment and she feels it everywhere she goes, whether it's there or not. I think that's just how she feels. And Tom, not so much, but he is kind of struggling with maybe his own feelings about events and things like that. So he kind of pushes people away and just kind of keeps to himself. He doesn't really want to let anyone in. So he's very isolated. They're
He's
both actually isolated in their own ways.
he is grieving or missing a previous romantic partner, Adeline, right?
Yeah, yeah. Adeline is like the love of his life who is no longer with him. So he's very stuck in the past. He's kind of stuck both like metaphorically and literally. He won't move house, so he's very attached to his house and but he's very nostalgic, but also a little bit in denial.
I know from my conversation with Rowan and also from the title and the cover of this book, the title is Depth of Field, that photography is pretty elemental to the plot or to at least one of the characters' lives. What can you tell us that isn't a spoiler about that?
So photography, Tom is a photographer and I'm also a photographer as well. So I initially wasn't going to include photography because I'm a photographer and I didn't really want to include anything that linked to me, but I put it in there and it just started working and I use the exposure triangle. So I guess some of this won't make sense to everyone, but I break it. The book is broken up into 3 parts and each one's named after an area of the exposure triangle. So we have shutter speed and aperture and then each chapter heading is a value from that. And it's basically a parallel to how the book progresses. So as you read on, the overall picture is meant to be becoming clearer and lighter, and you're meant to be getting getting more of the details from the characters, but also from the point of view of photography. Hard to
Yeah.
explain, and I didn't really intend for everyone to have to understand that. I guess for people who aren't into photography, it's just an interesting way of breaking up chapters. But for people who do like it, I hope that they will get a bit of an extra element from reading it because they'll be able to, understand it on a different level as well.
Absolutely. And Tom is a bit of a failed photographer, or at least his photography business is failing. Is that right?
It's not really that it's failing so much, it's more the fact that he just has no passion for it. He got into photography because Adeline was really into photography and she wanted to be a photographer. And so I guess when he lost her, he started doing more photography as a way to kind of stay connected to that the past. So, but I mean, he's been doing it for a long time, so he's just lost that passion for it. And he's doing real estate photography, so going into people's houses and, where everything's just very curated and not at all how they actually live. So that was just another interesting part, just to be able to have him going into people's houses and kind of making his own judgments about the kind of people that live there and trying to guess what their lives are like when they're putting forward their best version of their house and not necessarily what's reality.
Well, it sounds absolutely fascinating, and I'm not the only one who thinks it sounds fascinating. It won a prize before it was even published. It won the Dorothy Hewitt Award for a non-published manuscript. Tell us about that.
Yes, so that was amazing and very unexpected, which I feel like everyone says, but I feel like for me it really was. I was basically writing the book almost up into the deadline. I never actually read the book from beginning to end when I submitted it. I was just happy to have finished it, to be honest. And I was thinking that I was going to go and get it edited and, maybe see how it goes. But then it got shortlisted. I'd already booked an editor to read over it. And so the day that I was supposed to send it to that editor was the day that I got the call that I'd won. Yeah, it was just amazing. I was crying and my kids were all there looking at me and wondering why I'm crying, and I'm there trying to be, giving them the thumbs up. Like it's good. It's good tears.
Happy tears,
But
happy tears.
yeah, yeah. And I don't remember anything. I just felt like, yeah, I was just in a dream. I don't think I slept all night. I just lay in bed. I couldn't sleep. It's been my dream since I was 8 years old. So it just felt just the most amazing
Absolutely.
feeling.
I can only imagine how wonderful it felt. Congratulations. So, Kirsty, what are you working on now?
So I am working on another novel, but I'm just in the kind of early stages. I have a plot, but I just know from depth of field it changed so much from my initial plot to the end. It's almost a completely different book. So I'm not sure how to I probably can't explain it at this point because if I do, I don't want to lock myself into anything and it's probably going to be nothing like what it is in the end. But yeah.
I understand. But do you have any interest in writing in other genres, for example, short stories or memoir or any other kinds of writing interest you as a writer rather than a reader?
am interested in other kinds of writing. I have been trying to write a few more kind of short stories and personal essays and things like that. But I mean, I do love literary fiction. I just love the fact that, you know, you can kind of be looking at kind of bigger issues within it and just kind of slipping. I really like to have a purpose to what I'm writing. So I think I always need to come back to the purpose and what I'm actually trying to get at underneath all the plot and everything. So I guess I probably still tend to go more towards character-driven writing because that's just, yeah. I mean, I like reading more widely, but yeah.
Well, it sounds like you write the kind of fiction that I am most interested in reading. So that's great to hear.
That's good.
What kind of photography did you or do you do?
So I primarily do a lot of like food photography actually. And I go to a lot of venues. I was working for a few kind of magazines in Brisbane, so kind of going to new venues as they open and, you know, taking photos of them. I do a lot of dances as well. That's mainly come about just through connections and yeah, school graduations and a little bit of everything. But yeah, I've been kind of slowly kind of stepping back from photography and trying to focus more on the writing because yeah, I love photography, but it was always the backup to writing. I had a lot of backups. I did backups for backups, and so
Backups,
writing's the
backups.
main thing. But yeah, I've done a bit of it. Yes, yeah. Yeah, so I was also studying at uni when I was when I won that, and like I'd already studied, and yeah, just lots of, I guess, trying to find what I wanted to do because I just didn't think writing was ever going to be a realistic thing. So I guess now that yeah, with depth of field, I'm kind of excited to be able to focus on that a little bit more now.
That's wonderful. So I'd like to hear what kind of books you like to read. I think you've got some books to recommend to us.
Yes. So they are Australian books that I've read
Great.
recently. I have pretty much only been reading Australian books recently just because I've been meeting so many, you know, really wonderful authors at all the events that I've been doing and obviously trying to read all their books and I'm massively behind. I don't read often enough to get through it all. But so the first one is Ghost Cities by Siang. And it's actually really hard to even explain this book because it doesn't seem to fit into any kind of category or anything. It's basically it starts off about a man who's working as a translator and he gets fired when they realize that he's been using Google Translate to
Okay.
in his job. So, but then there's also like two different stories, and then it's like an ancient kind of text. It's very kind of intelligent and unexpectedly funny in places that you don't expect it to be. I know Siang as well, and the way his brain works is is next level. He's a very intelligent person. So, and it comes across in his book, but yeah, it's not even necessarily the kind of book I would have normally picked up, but I just loved it. I just don't think I've ever read anything else like it. So that's the one. And the other one I'm going to recommend, I'm not quite finished, but I'm
No
loving it
problem.
enough that I still feel confident recommending it. It's the book I'm reading at the moment, and it's Breath by Carly J. Metcalfe. She has cystic fibrosis, so it's a memoir. She survived a double lung transplant when she was 21 and then cancer when she was 30 and just so much. I actually wasn't initially, it's not the kind of thing I'd normally read either, to be honest, because I just guess, you know, the health thing but it's so beautifully written and she just writes in such a beautiful way, but also she's very honest and she's very funny and I didn't expect to love it as much as I do. So yeah, those are my two recommendations that I've read recently that I just loved.
You do pretty well when you pick up books that you don't think are necessarily Kirsty books.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I guess usually I've always just kind of picked up the same kind of book, but because I've been, going to these events and then meeting them, meeting the authors, I've been kind of like, oh, I really should read their books. And then I've read them and yeah, actually just adored them.
It's good to be open to new things. Kirsty, your novel Depth of Field sounds like it's going to be a Shawn book. I'm looking forward to reading it, and once I have read it, I hope you'll come back and we can chat about it in detail.
That would be fabulous. I would love that.
Yes. So, and in the meantime, best of luck with your new project.
Thank you. Thank you for
And
having me.
thank you so much, Kirsty. Good luck. Kirsty was wonderful. Can't wait to read her book, and I hope you'll read it too. All right, I have been busy on BookTube. I got 3 videos up. I think it's the first time in many months that I've gotten 3 up. But I've got such a backlog of videos that are taped and collecting dust in my archives. Some of the guests in this most recent episode of Bite Size Book Chats are from a year ago. And that's all right. It's not stale in any other way. I had a book haul up on the weekend, I think it was, and then I put up a chat with Mikiko about my reading project in homage to her, just like she did a similar reading project last year in homage to yours truly. So that was a fun video to make and sets the course for some interesting reading in the year ahead, in the year coming up. So those were the videos I got up. And I haven't finished any books this week, despite having a fabulous reading week. I have books to check in on, and I'll be starting one. I don't think very many of you are interested in the British royal family, so I'm not going to give much of a check-in on this, but this is excellent. This is Victoria's Daughters by Jerrold M. Packard. And when I mentioned that I was going to be reading it a couple of Friday reads ago, I forgot to say that this is my one Victober read. I always try to read something about Queen Victoria in Victober, even though I seem to have completely gotten away from Victorian literature. I haven't participated by reading Victorian literature for several years, and I think I might just be done with Victorian literature, at least for the time being. But I'll never, ever be done with Queen Victoria, or her daughters, apparently, because this is absolutely fascinating. The one thing that I'll say is that Victoria and Albert's second oldest daughter married a Grand Duke from Hesse-Darmstadt, if I'm pronouncing that right, which was a duchy in pre-unified Germany. And the history of that duchy, and also the oldest daughter, she married the heir to the Prussian throne. So I'm reading a lot about German history that I probably studied. I don't think I've studied much about the Grand Duchy of Hesse-Darmstadt when I was a university history major, but that is all just fascinating. Oh, I just love all that. So this is going great. This is a buddy read with my dear friend Leah. And I'm finally ready to check in on this from Spinster September. What's the date? Late October. I've now read a few more chapters in it and am really enjoying it, actually. By a Chinese-Canadian writer, Zoë S. Roy, who I'd never heard of, and I'd never heard of this book. I found it, as I think I've told you, many Friday reads ago by just looking for books with the word spinster in them for Spinster September. This was published in 2019. I would say that the prose is quite workmanlike, so, and then she did this, and then she did this, and then she thought this, and then she wondered about this. So there's nothing particularly impressive about the prose, but I've fallen into the story. So just a reminder, the protagonist, Kang, is a new immigrant to Canada from China, and she intends to be a spinster for the rest of her life because when she was 12, her 16-year-old sister was raped, and she is terrified of men. She doesn't want to have anything to do with men, and that comes to the fore in the early chapters because her female roommate in Toronto, where she's been living for a couple of years, keeps bringing her boyfriend home, and she and this female roommate are sharing a bedroom, and she moves out. So she's got a new female roommate who doesn't have boyfriends. Stay tuned, or I'm staying tuned to see how that all develops. But that's where I'm at in the story, and it's really interesting. So here are 3 things that have captured my imagination. She talks about the Chinese expression packed yellow croakers. I thought, I could tell in context what it means, but I didn't know what a packed yellow croaker was. Well, it's a It's a type of fish. So this is like packed like sardines. It's exactly the same meaning, but in the Chinese expression, I will put the Chinese both in, do they call it romaji? And I don't know what they call it in when you're putting Chinese words or phrases in the Western alphabet. In Japan, that's called romaji. I don't know what it's, never known what it's called in Chinese, but here it is in both renderings. And it's just like packed like sardines. So yellow croakers are a type of fish commonly found in China. Here's a picture of them. And they're typically packed together closely in boxes or baskets. And then our protagonist, Kang, she regularly practices with a Tai Chi stick. Well, I knew vaguely about Tai Chi. You see people doing this. But what the heck was a Tai Chi stick? So I looked that up, and that's a wooden or metal staff that's used as an extension of the body during Tai Chi movements. I don't remember ever seeing one, but I probably wasn't paying much attention. And it helps with balance and this and that. The form that you make with your body and the extension of your body that is the Tai Chi stick focuses on circular motions and fluid transitions between postures, something that I have never been, that has never been one of my strong suits. So maybe I need a Tai Chi stick. The last thing just blows my mind. I lived in Toronto where this novel is set. I just remembered a fourth thing, so stay tuned. There's one more after this. But I lived in Toronto from 1993 to 1999. And I lived right in the gay ghetto, Church and Wellesley. And that's the area where she's living with this woman who doesn't have any boyfriends. You do the math. It seems like that's where the story's going, which is going to be really interesting. But they go out to dinner on Church Street to a restaurant that was like literally a block and a half from where I used to live. I lived in several locations in that same area, but the last one before I moved back to Western Canada was right a block and a half from this restaurant, and this is called, it's still there, Toronto Au Noir. This novel was published in 2019 and is set, I think it's set in 2003 or 4. So this is a restaurant, and I think they have one in Montreal, and they may have them other places, but I have never heard of this, and it's absolutely fascinating. All the staff are blind, and you eat in near total darkness. A very dim candle at your table, but really you're in virtually pitch black darkness, and your waiters are blind, and the concept is that you taste your food much more richly when you can't see it. It's still there. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And if any of you have been there or to any such type of restaurant, I want to hear all about it. My goodness. The last thing I want to say about this novel is, based on the first 3 chapters or something, is her name is Kang, and her older sister's name was, and she was born in 1966, the older sister, and is Jean. And that was when the Cultural Revolution started. And the parents chose 2 names that were so innocuous that they wouldn't become politically suspect or problematic during the Cultural Revolution. And both of those names, they're the 2 readings of the same character. Kang and Jean both mean health. And that was an innocuous enough name that the family wouldn't get into any trouble. So she tells her new roommate that names that got families and individuals into trouble during the Cultural Revolution were one that had the character May, which could mean America. So anyone with the name May was often harassed, or if not persecuted by the government. Or Tai, T-A-I, because that might mean Taiwan. So choosing names very carefully so as to avoid getting into trouble just based on your name was a big deal during that horrific period of Chinese history. So, can you tell that I'm quite enthralled with this now? And the last one is another preliminary check-in on Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. I believe it's her penultimate novel. I'm doing this as a buddy read with Sonia of An Enthusiastic Reader. This was published in 2021. Yeah, I've read 4 chapters, and I'm doing it as an audio text combo, and am enjoying it very much. I don't think that on the sentence level, Claire Fuller is much of a prose stylist, and I don't need my fiction to always be about that, but it's a very engaging story. The mother drops dead in the first chapter. She had lived with her 2 adult children. I think her children were in their 50s. And Jeannie is the woman and Julius is her brother. And they are what you would say if you weren't worried about offending people. They're kind of backwards, the whole family. They don't believe in doctors. They don't have very many friends in the neighborhood. They keep to themselves. They're very poor and just kind of backwards, if I can put it that way. And so the mother's death is calamitous, and Jeannie didn't know that you had to register a death or what to do and all this. And I know from what I've heard and what I remember about what I've heard about this novel is that the property becomes a big issue. And it's a chunky novel. It's 330 pages or something, so there's lots more story to come, but I am really interested in the characters already, and there's lots of stuff about class. So far, so good. So I have maybe another 60 or 75 pages to read before Sonia and I have our first check-in early next week. All right. I got to the end of my Friday reads. I got to the end of editing my Friday reads and realized I forgot to tell you about the book I'll be starting this week. So here it is. It's called Panthers and the Museum of Fire by Jen Craig, a 2015 novella from Australia. And I'm doing this as a buddy read with Joe Smith. The idea was that we would take part in the Wafer Thin book club that Brad Bigelow and James Morrison are co-hosting, if I've got all that right. And it turns out that the live chat, the Zoom chat about the book, it takes place on an evening that I'm always teaching, and Joe can't attend that night either. But we're going to watch the video that they put out on their website or whatever later, but we're still going to read it. And it is, the opening premise is that a woman is walking in Sydney carrying the manuscript of her friend, of a childhood friend who has recently died. What else do I need to know? So I'm not going to do a preliminary check-in on this because I don't want Joe to hear my opinion before Joe and I check in only once on Halloween evening. So that's the kind of week it's been. Thanks for watching.